So the cosmic entities are getting involved in the Queen in Black event in Marvel. And ironically enough, it's actually Cloak and Dagger that cause it. Now, if you're not familiar with them, we'll talk about them as we get to this video, so I won't leave you hanging. But all of this basically starts with Cloak being foolhardy, which is to say, jumping directly into the attack against Null. Now, one of the things to keep in mind as part of the Queen in Black event is you effectively have two conflicts going on at the same time. Hela is launching a full-scale invasion of Earth. That's what's happening right now in the main Queen in Black event. Null is on his way there, and he will eventually attack Earth, presumably, although most likely, it will just end up as a conflict between Hela and Null. Because, truth to tell, Earth is kind of a pit stop on the way, and Hela's simply attacking it to move the superheroes out of the way so she can directly conquer the rest of the universe. Because keep in mind, right, Earth has some of the most powerful superheroes within the Marvel Universe. You move them off the board, the universe becomes easier to conquer. And so what ended up happening in response to this is Cable and Iron Man put together two teams. One team that manipulates dark energy that goes against Null. The other team manipulating light energy that would actually end up going against Hela. And that's kind of what you see playing out here, right? While Hela has her invasion on Earth, the other team is facing off against her directly. And so what ended up happening is that when Cloak immediately attacked Null, he was stabbed through the chest by a light spear. And that's why Null starts to taunt him, right? Does it hurt, Void Imposter? The corrosive light inside you, corrupting mind, body, and soul. And that's an important distinction to understand here. Yes, Null has the power of light, but he comes from the darkness. And so from Null's perspective, and it's not an unreasonable one, there's a difference between people who are of the darkness like Null and people who just draw on that energy because they were given the ability to do it. And that's why he refers to Cloak as an imposter. He's not from the void, he can just draw on the energy of the void, or at least darkness in any sense. And so the result of this is that with Cloak, not really out of commission, but certainly injured, Darkstar jumps in to basically rescue Cloak, and then Iron Man offers defense for both. Now, Darkstar is a criminally slept-on character in Marvel Comics, and I imagine some of you guys are asking, who is this girl? Darkstar is a mutant that has the ability to basically manipulate Dark Force energy, and in fact, she can create Dark Force constructs. She's been around the Marvel Universe for quite some time. She initially started off as part of Cyberforce, which this is going to be a terrible comparison, but it's like Russia's version of the X-Men, so to speak, but basically working for the government. And then she eventually moves on to Russia's Super Soldier program, which renames itself to People's Protectorate. So you could kind of consider that to be Russia's version of the Avengers. Eventually, People's Protectorate and Cyberforce merge, and that becomes what you and I might call the Uncanny Avengers for Russia, a combination of mutants and traditional superheroes working together as a singular team, but as a government-backed organization. So kind of like Uncanny Avengers meets X Factor from Peter David in 1993. But the fact remains here, it's simply just to establish Darkstar is not enough to defeat Null, but she is enough to hold the line, right? She's no slouch, right? She definitely deserves a lot more respect within Marvel than she currently gets. But at the end of the day, because of the fact that Cloak had acted so recklessly, the reality is that a lot of the plan hinged on him. And with him out of commission, the plan has kind of gone sideways, right? And so that leads to Agent Anti-Venom, Flash Thompson, jumping in and holding the line as best he can. Because again, all this is kind of in this moment right now, a situation where quite literally the most important guy, or one of the most important guys, is injured. So everybody's kind of like, okay, what do we do, right? We kind of have to call an audible and we got to play it by ear until we can figure out what's going on with Cloak. And that's the thing, right? Cable says, Darkstar, give me a sit rep. And her response, he's not looking very good, Nathan. At that point, you switch over to Monica Rambeau. And Monica Rambeau realizes that Dagger is down. Why? Because when it comes to Cloak and Dagger, what affects one affects the other. Their powers are inextricably tied to one another. Now, all of this goes back to the Bill Mantlo days in the Spectacular Spider-Man comics and the evolving relationship between the two. Because when they were subjected to their experiments as runaways, they found a kind of bond in the sense that Cloak, again, having the ability to access the Dark Force dimension, has a constant kind of hunger. The power of Dagger feeds that hunger. At the same time, Dagger herself, Tandy, is not that dissimilar from Bishop in Marvel Comics, which is to say that a lot of you guys know Bishop can absorb energy and then channel that energy back out. He has to discharge it somehow, eventually. Otherwise, it's like water overflowing in a cup. Tandy is very much the same way, right? That what Tyrone does, what Cloak does, is he absorbs her excess light energy so she doesn't overload. With the two of them in this kind of yin and yang, almost symbiotic relationship with one another, they kind of were inseparable, right? Just because they had to be. Over the years in Marvel Comics, that has evolved away from a necessity to a real, true soul bond with one another and everything that comes with it, to the point that when one is injured, the other is injured because they are quite literally linked to each other. And that's why Tandy is also out of commission. And that was the risk that was being taken by Iron Man and Cable. It's what they were talking about in issue number 1, right? That there is a kind of significance here, right? If the two of them really are our secret weapon, right? And the basis behind the plan, we have to make sure they stay safe, right? They're the kings on the chessboard, so to speak. And so that's why when Monica comes running up to Tandy, right? She was like, Sunfire, cover us, keep us protected, right? The question that's asked by Sunfire is, what is a photon, right? What wounded Dagger? And her response is, we don't know. I don't know, right? Because they don't realize that Cloak was injured. And she's just kind of like, that's strange, right? But the other thing about this is Cloak talks about how significant the injury is, how much it hurts, and that on the inside, it feels cold. Now, at that point, you do momently switch over to Tyr and to Beta Ray Bill. One of the things to keep in mind here throughout the entirety of the Queen in Black event, and it is something that we'll kind of repeat over the course of this for the new people, is that nobody remembers the Thor mythos. So no one in the Marvel Universe remembers the fact that Beta Ray Bill was part of the Thor mythos. He was an ally. He was given Thor's powers at one point in time. Tyr and Hela and all these guys, right? The only thing they really know is that Hela just represents a threat against Earth, but they don't know what she is or what she's about. Beta Ray Bill does. He's tried to explain it, but for the most part, everything he says are kind of taken as the ravings of a madman. But at the very least, a lot of people are starting to realize there's some measure of truth to it. Now, the whole moment with Beta Ray Bill and Tyr is not overly important. If anything, it's just kind of designed to show us and remind us the nature of Beta Ray Bill. This guy's every bit as capable and honorable as Thor, right? He will fight against evil forevermore, however long it takes. That's why he says, I will stand where I always have, Tyr, against injustice, against evil, against the dark machinations of those like your witch queen. And that's why Tyr just kind of tells him, and in doing so, you seal your doom, Bill. To stand against Lady Hela is to stand against death itself, and death always prevails. Now, this is not to be a moment to confuse the idea that Hela is somehow Mistress Death. The two are not the same. There have been a lot of arguments over the years and a lot of indications from Marvel that Hela may very well be a facsimile or an avatar of Mistress Death, but as far as I'm aware, they're two completely different beings. They're not necessarily the same. But the point is that with Cloak basically dying from his injuries, so is Dagger. And that's the crazy thing, is because in this moment, that's when the cosmic entities step in, specifically the in-betweener, because you kind of get this moment where the two of them don't know where they are. Their consciousness leaves their bodies. And that's where Dagger just asks, right, where are you, Tyrone? And the in-betweener says, he is here, child, as are you. In the very womb of duality, where the light force and dark force energies were first separated by the prime source, eons upon eons upon eons ago. The Taiji threshold, the primordial pivot point where dualities are born, tested, and ultimately balanced. And should that fail, they are reclaimed. Now, it is worth mentioning that this entire concept is actually based on a Chinese philosophy of oneness. But even then, it's a concept that in different ways exists outside of Chinese philosophy. For example, I think it was Aristotle who argued the idea of soulmates, that at one point people had two sets of arms, legs, eyes, two faces, two sets of naughty bits. And that humans, I think, had tried to climb Mount Olympus and angered the gods. And so Zeus, fearing that humans were becoming so powerful, separated people into men and women. And that was kind of the explanation for the idea of soulmates, right? Men and women hunting for their equal. But the fact is, right, at the end of the day, what the in-betweener says is he introduces himself and says, I am the in-betweener, created by Master Order and Lord Chaos to serve as an agent of universal balance, a cosmic synthesis of infinite duality, neither here nor there, and yet everywhere. And so Dagger just says she doesn't really understand, which makes sense because they don't traditionally have dealings with cosmic entities in Marvel Comics. And so the question's asked, right? What's any of this got to do with us, this place, or you? And the in-betweener just says, it is quite simple, albeit singularly complicated. The all-light spear wielded by the null entity pierced Cloak, dangerously infusing him with light force energy. And due to your innate soul connection, Cloak's dark force energy is now being injected into you, Dagger. Thus, your anomalous balance has been severely compromised, and you must now both be tested by the threshold. And so, as the universal dualistic intermediary, it is my duty to bear witness to your unraveling. Effectively, they are going to die, or at the very least, shift into a new state of being. And that's kind of what happens, right? While everybody else is playing defense, trying to protect Cloak and Dagger and keep them alive due to their significance with regards to the plan, the statement continues on, right? Order fractures into chaos. Chaos collapses back into order, over and over and over. From the very first moment your powers awakened, Tandy Bowen, called Dagger, Tyrone Johnson, called Cloak, your soul connection has always been a lie of motion, unstable, unbalanced. True balance is a stillness, the end of the pendulum swing, yet you have never known it. You are nothing more than a fracture pretending to be a circle, an anomaly the threshold now reclaims. And so in this moment, you could make an argument in saying they're presented with a fork in the road. Either they could take the path to the right, which leads to whatever their new forms would become when this imbalance is corrected, or they can take the path to the left and basically take fate in their own hands. And that's exactly what they do. And if anything, it's a testament to the love between the two, because what ends up happening is Tyrone, right? Cloak says, Tandy, can you hear me? And she says yes. And his response, listen to me, right? Ignore this joker. He's wrong, which is kind of funny to hear Cloak talk so cavalierly about a cosmic entity, right? The in-betweener, man, this joker, gotta know what he's talking about. But he kind of doesn't, right? Because Cloak says, when Knowles stabbed me, when he filled me with all that burning light, the pain I felt was the thought of losing you, all the amazing things about you. I was scared I'd lose you forever. You're the only light I ever need in the endless dark, Tandy. And her response, you're the only shadow that ever makes me feel safe. And that's the significance, right? When you have a woman in your life, more than anything, she wants to feel safe. She wants to feel like things are going to be okay. And that's what Cloak does. He literally reassures her, right? You're the only thing that ever mattered to me. Come hell or high water, I will let the world burn before I let anything happen to the two of us. That reassurance, it literally reaffirms the connection between the two. And so that's where she just says, you're right. The in-betweener doesn't get it. Our balance is not about stillness, it's a dance. And so in response to that, the in-betweener in observing this just says, unstable and therefore unstoppable. Carry your chaos well, young lovers. The universe is watching how brightly you refuse to settle. And ultimately leaves. In that moment, the two of them wake up and they get a power upgrade. They are now more powerful than they've been before. And while Marvel doesn't really give us a definitive answer, I would go so far as to say that when it came to Cloak and Dagger, the history between the two of them was that as individuals, they began to care for one another more and more as time went on. But when it came to their powers and how their powers kind of relied on the other, it was viewed more as just kind of like an inconvenience, a problem, a handicap, right? Something that caused more issues than solutions. Whereas in this moment, it is no, right? Our powers are a part of who we are, and we love the other person for who we are. Therefore, there is a wholeness between the two of us. We are the most pure representation of two people joined at the soul who are inseparable. If anything, while there is the kind of idea that there, is a separation there and there is chaos, I would argue that the threshold succeeded, right? They are now more of a cohesive whole than they've ever been before. It's momentary, it's small, it's not huge, but for anybody who's familiar with the Cloak and Dagger mythos, it's huge, right? It's big, it's a big deal, right? It's massive, right? And so that's why when they come back, right? Darkstar is like, damn, Cloak, I thought we were gonna lose you, right? And he's just kind of like, yeah, I kind of did too, right? And so she asks, how do you feel? And he says, I feel different. The response of Dagger, the same thing, right? I feel different. I feel better than I ever have, because now she's able to wield the All Light. Now, I don't know if that means that she is equal in power to Null, but in essence, she's able to tap into the same level of power that Null is, or at least the same kind of power. And that's what we're talking about here. That's the difference. Before, they were borrowing these abilities, which is to say they were given the ability to tap into the Light Force and into the Dark Force. Now, it looks like they are part and parcel to it. And that brings them to a whole different level of power, right? And so that's where she's just kind of like, I'm ready to get back into the fight. And that's exactly what happens, right? Immediately, wielding this Light Force sword, they start taking it to the forces of Hela and just start crushing everything. And that's the funny thing here is Iron Man says, check it out, Cable, right? The kid's back better than ever, or badder than ever, right? And it says, look like my math's mathing just fine, right? And so Null just kind of observes this and says, so, not quite the imposter after all. Very well. And when you have Dagger facing off against the forces of Hela, she basically says the same thing as Null, right? These wretched Midgardians continue to vex me. Fine, right? The time has come to end this. Now, do not let this trick you into thinking that the two of them are joining forces. I highly doubt it, right? It's just the two of them recognizing, all right, fine, if that's how we're gonna be, all bets are off. Up until this point, you were entertaining, right? Like a clown dancing for the delight of children. But now we're done, right? It's time to put up or shut up, and it's A-game time. And at that point, we switch over to Earth. Now, keep in mind, the conflict that's happening on Earth regarding the invasion of Hela at this particular moment centers around Dylan, the son of Eddie Brock, because the big difference between Dylan and pretty much anybody who's ever wielded a symbiote, or anybody who even is a symbiote, is that unlike Eddie Brock or Spider-Man or Cletus Cassidy or any of those guys, Dylan has the inherent ability to control symbiotes. And the reason why this is so important here is because with Hela having the former powers of Null, she can control the living abyss. She can control symbiotes, but not all symbiotes are equal. Venom, Carnage, Sleeper, Toxin, these are all symbiotes that by whatever manner and whatever means over the course of Marvel's publication history have quote unquote broken away from the hive mind, which means now they are autonomous. They can do their own thing. They're not bound by the same kind of rules that symbiotes traditionally are, meaning they cannot be controlled by Hela. Hence the reason why Hela's forces were after Dylan, because if she gets Dylan, then all symbiotes fall under her control. And given the fact that guys like Sleeper and Venom and Toxin and Carnage and so on all have somewhat unique abilities, getting control of those means now the significance of it all becomes far more wieldy. Lest we forget, this comic is in a lot of ways a throwback to the Donny Cates run, where we saw an alternate reality where Dylan Brock in that universe had quite literally led a campaign that killed all the superheroes and replaced the superheroes with symbiotes. So that's kind of what you're potentially looking at here if he actually adopts that Codex ability. And that's the reason why when this opens up, you've got Spider-Man and Mary Jane Watson, right? And the question is, can Dylan even breathe in there? Basically, this kind of like symbiote tank that he's in, or at least a containment tank. And the response of Peter, it says, look, according to my spider sense, it's not him we have to worry about. It's us, because immediately the tank starts to attack. Now, the tank is kind of like the symbiote supreme intelligence, but it's not equal to the traditional Kree supreme intelligence. It doesn't have all the knowledge of every single symbiote that's ever existed, largely because of the fact that it doesn't have control of Dylan, or at least Hela doesn't have control of Dylan. The best way to look at this is that it's basically just kind of like a cage that Dylan's being kept in that can also fight back against whatever tries to free Dylan from that cage. And so Mary Jane asked the question, right? What's the play here, Spider-Man? How do we save Dylan? And the response of Peter, you bulk up and keep those robot legs busy so it doesn't scuttle away with him as a hostage, right? I will draw its fire and do what every fire alarm ever taught me. In case of emergency, break glass. The problem is that it doesn't really work, right? Like Peter goes to attack it and it's just like, okay, so like I'm hitting this stuff with everything I have, my bones are going to break before I break this glass. And that's where Sleeper shows up here. Now, Sleeper is quite literally one of these symbiotes that's kind of like a sleeper symbiote. You almost never see him in Marvel Comics, but he's been around the block more than a few times, spacefaring escapades and all kinds of stuff. So he kind of has a level of military strategy and knowledge that most everyone here doesn't have. And that's why Sleeper says, right, this is Kree military grade polycarbonate. They use it in their cockpits. I encountered Kree starfighters often in my travels across the galaxy. And so in that moment, right, Sleeper reveals to Spider-Man that his host is Eddie Brock. Now, one of the things that we saw in Venom Unchained, which is kind of where that was covered, was that the Sleeper symbiote, in the midst of all of this, appeared to Eddie and gave Eddie the means to escape prison, with the two of them bonding together, just because of the fact that there's a crisis. Something has to be done here. Now, Eddie also has a hard time staying away from symbiotes, and that's what Spider-Man says. You just can't stay away from symbiotes, can you, right? Like, shouldn't you be in jail? Because the last time Peter saw him, he was, right? But again, Eddie Brock's out of here, and at this point, rescuing Dylan is the most important thing. And so that's where Sleeper chimes back in, right, and says, this material is resistant to impact and chemical attack, but not both together, specifically if the chemicals are formed from earthly elements. Because the reality here is that Earth is a backwater world, and it is, right? It's one of the reasons why, with Earth having so many powerful superheroes, it both shocked the greater universal community within the Marvel Universe that Earth had so many powerful people, but it's also what frustrates them at the same time. Because when you think about it, right, most every other civilization within the Marvel Universe is capable of interstellar travel, and they have empires that span multiple star systems across any particular galaxy, and sometimes even include entire galaxies. But when it comes to Earth, we landed on the moon. Cool, bro. Like, the Fantastic Four are the only ones who are truly capable of interstellar and even other dimensional travel in any meaningful way. Well, technically now it's also Black Panther because he has the intergalactic empire of Wakanda, but like a couple of people on Earth, right? So it's one of these things where Earth is just considered incredibly primitive. And that's what Sleeper's talking about here. He says the Kree, because of the nature of Earth being a backwater world, are not familiar with fluoroantimonic acid, not quite strong enough to eat through the polycarbonate, but it will make it very, very brittle. And that's exactly what happens, right? Using this, they basically crack the glass. But that's the kicker, is that even with rescuing Dylan, he doesn't want to go, right? He doesn't want to escape. Because the funny thing about this is that he asks, right, Dad, is that you? And Sleeper basically says, look, it's not that simple, right? We can't just rescue him out of here as quickly as humanly possible, right? Because that's the question, right? Get him out of there as fast as you can. And Sleeper just says, right, a tug of war with the symbiote intelligence could rip Dylan in half. It's better if he breaks himself free, right? The issue with this is that if he does that and taps into his codex abilities, it's entirely possible that if he's snatched back in, suddenly he becomes the very agent that Hela needs. So it's kind of a quagmire here, right? Does he use his powers to get himself out, knowing that the instant he activates his codex abilities, it's exactly what Hela's looking for? Or does he potentially risk death by trying to escape without his powers? But that's where Sleeper just says, you have to trust me here, right? Trust me on this. And that's exactly what Dylan does. He activates his codex abilities, and in doing that, breaks himself free. And nothing happens, right? Hela doesn't get his hands on him or anything like that. And for the most part, he's liberated from it all, right? And that's the crazy thing, is because now that Dylan's out and they basically toss aside this Supreme Intelligence cage, that now Eddie Brock has to bail, right? Because he says, I'm sorry, Dylan, but I have to leave you and Toxin now. Eddie and I have work to do, and we've done what we came to do here. My advice would be to get to the Baxter building as soon as humanly possible, ideally before the armed alien symbiotes get to you. And so that's exactly what they do. Right now, there is a kind of momentary argument that goes on here. And in fact, this feeds back into the events of Death Spiral, right? Because what goes on is that there's this almost kind of instance where Mary Jane basically argues it's acceptable for Dylan Brock to kill enemies. It's acceptable for her to kill enemies, that Dylan should do whatever he has to do in order to survive. Spider-Man is against that, right? Spider-Man does not support that kind of action. but MJ does, because lest we forget, when we got around to the ending of the Death Spiral event, she killed Torment, right? Like, she killed him. And even Peter recognized it. At the moment, he didn't want to believe it. Later on, he comes to accept the fact that it is something that Mary Jane Watson did. And in a lot of ways, it changed the way that he saw her, right? Which a lot of Spider-Man fans were not happy with. Because one of the things that Spider-Man fans have always wanted to see was Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson get back together again. But with Marvel writing the ending of a story that seemingly irrevocably changed the way that Peter saw MJ, it basically seemed to move them further apart, not closer together, which is not what hardcore Spider-Man fans were interested in, right? And so that's the interesting thing here, is that as they actually get their way into the Baxter building, they're met by the arrival of Reed and Susan, right? And it's one of these things, because Peter had said, you know, Dylan's family, and that's why MJ's like, look, family does what it needs to in order to survive, even if that means killing people. Now, I don't think the Fantastic Four overheard that bit of a conversation here, because when Mary Jane asked Peter the question, right, do you want to lose any more family? Because I don't want to lose any more family. The response of Reed and Susan, well, I don't think any of us want to lose family, but we're always happy to add some. Welcome to the Baxter Building, Venom and Company. Sorry, Felicia couldn't stick around because she had basically shown up previously in Black Cat issue number 14. But their whole stance here is, hey, so right now, like Franklin and Valeria are basically in lockup, right? So they're being protected from all of this stuff because Marvel had to find a way to remove Franklin from the event. Otherwise, Franklin would go out and just be like, yeah, I don't like this, snap his fingers and end the whole story. And Valeria, I mean, what's she gonna do? I mean, she's super intelligent, but hardly the best fighter. And Ben Grimm and literally Johnny Storm are down on Earth right now, dealing with the invasion itself. And so at that point, the question's asked, hey, so do you guys want to join the Fantastic Four? Because we've changed the symbol on our chest. We're the Fantastic Five now, which is kind of cool because at that point, you switch over to Times Square. And because the nature of the suits is that they quite literally do change, right? Unstable molecules, they can change in real time. Literally, Johnny Storm's symbol on his chest changes to a 5. I love it, right? It happens in like real time. But here's the kicker about all of this. For the most part, they all are holding their own in the conflict down here. And even when Spider-Man and these guys start showing up here, it's like, okay, cool. So we're holding the forces of Hela at bay. We're going to start pushing everything back. And you guys have all been part of comics long enough to know that when things feel like they're getting better in an event like this, they're almost always going to get worse. Why? Because in this moment, Firelord shows up. And Firelord is a former Herald of Galactus. This guy is OP to the point that, if I remember correctly, during the original Phoenix era, not the Phoenix Saga, but the era between the Phoenix Saga and Dark Phoenix Sagas, when Jean Grey, at what was arguably the height of her power, went toe-to-toe against Firelord. And while that was more of an indication of how capable Jean Grey had become, it speaks to how powerful Firelord is. Not only that, he has a symbiote that is immune to fire. So Johnny Storm is right out the door at this point. I mean, what's he gonna do against someone like Firelord who has a fire-empowered symbiote? So yeah, things are about to get nuts, guys. With that being said, we're gonna bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.